We're going to segue quite quickly into the next session. Just to give you a bit of a context of how, there's a reason why it's been set up like that. This is an open table conversation. So we're going to have, as I'd mentioned earlier, the hierarchies are broken down. So we've got our three speakers who will be talking about their work, particularly in relation to the money question, which I'll talk about in a second. And after we're done speaking, which will be about half hour between all of us, there is no formal Q&A. Anybody can come and join us at either of the seats here. Once you've finished with your question or your comment, you can choose to stay or you can choose to go back, but be mindful of the seats being filled so that other people get a chance to ask questions or comment. And so hence, this becomes all our conversation. Just to give you a bit about the format. I think finally it's also about money, right? Like we want to do a lot and we're very passionate about it, but we also need to get 3 square meals a day and then some travel money. So how do we manage to get this kind of, how do we manage to survive to begin with and then flourish after in the arts? And with that question, we felt it was very important to bring in 3 very distinctive structures of how arts and culture is being run in this country with the kind of capital systems that they are building. So to begin with, we'll have 3 of our speakers. I'll introduce each one of them just before they are speaking. The first person we wanted to sort of bring is Arundhati Ghosh. She has mentioned quite a bit. One of the, what I do want to talk about is India Foundation for the Arts. For the last 25 years, it's been running this phenomenal independent cultural organization, which in some sense is able to work outside the implicit policy that Raj earlier spoke about, right? You're able to circumvent that because of the structure of the way you've been funding arts practice and arts research. So with that, I would love for you, Arundhati, to just share. Can everybody see, or would I be interrupting? If you could just share the IF story, the IFA story. The IF has been in the news lately. And where are you overall with the dynamic of how do you see IFA contributing to this ecosystem of survival and growth?
Thanks, Rashmi. I'll take about 5-7 minutes to just quickly take you through some of the questions we've been asking. I won't spend too much time on what is IFA, I'm sure most of you know. But what I do want to underline is the core of what we support. We support critical work that challenges dominant narrative and speaks truth to power. So obviously that puts us, as you understand, in a very, very interesting place, especially in these times. And we focus on journeys that seek unheard voices, untold stories. We are a funding organization, but we also see ourselves as facilitators, catalysts, and provocateurs in the arts. Just a little bit of statistics. So over 600 projects. We also do so many other things outside of funding the arts. But this is the exciting part, which is environmentally, how are we situated? Yeah. So this is the organization. The money question is the session. So I said this money comes in, there's money making more money, and money going out. That's also the way in which you could look at the organization. And those are 3 teams distinctly doing that. But we sit in a very interesting place between what we would like to say the hegemonies of the state and market and where their support for the arts come from, because these are really our worlds. There's the donor world, who we interact with, funders, partners, sponsors. And on the other side, we have the arts world, artists, scholars, teachers, opinion makers, critics. That's our environment within which we function. We have multiple funding sources, all of them, as well as our own art services, fundraising events, etc. The reason I quickly went through all of this because I do want to concentrate on 3 things. One, what works for us. The next slide would be who doesn't work for us. And the third one would be what are challenges today. I've put up a lot, but I'll just talk about 2 because that's the time we will have. And Rashmi asked me this question, that what works for you? I've been doing this for the last 18, 19 years now. What I've seen really works for us is long-term engagements where the honesty of sharing success, failures and challenges, has been very open with all our donors. And we have lost donors because of that, but that's been okay because we've got some really long-term partners also because of the same reason. And the second thing which I believe is really important, we've talked a lot about community, collective leadership within the organization. I am not the only voice. There are many people here who know IFA, but may not know me, but know other people in the organization. And the reason I say multiple fundraisers, while ultimately it is Menaka, my colleague, and I who look after fundraising, anybody at IFA can actually come and ask you to become a friend of IFA. That really works because everybody then has a stake in it. Who doesn't work for us? This was a hard question that Rashmi asked, but I felt that a lot of the things which we think about, discuss, should sometime be articulated and put down. I'll talk about two. Donors who tell us who to support, because we don't feel donors should be the ones to decide. It should be artists, scholars, researchers, people within the arts who should decide. So all our grant making is decided by expert panels or evaluators, reviewers. There's an internal team as well as an external team that takes the external panel that takes the final call. And who doesn't work for us are also who are uncomfortable with art making provocations, being controversial, or taking political positions, because we believe that every narrative, every story, especially the ones who are challenging dominance, are political stories at the heart of it. Challenges, again, we all across the room share all these challenges. For us, the two key challenges have been that grant making per se is not seen as an expert practice on its own. So a lot of there are very few organizations which support the arts. Two, those who are there would love to do that directly, and we love that they go directly to a theater maker or a space or a group of dancers and fund it directly. But to come through IFA, so some of them may seem, why am I doing this double take? So the value that we put in as experts in the area of philanthropy and grant making is not always recognized. The second is the kind of work we support. We support a lot of work that is in unexplored areas, that are looking at caste, gender, sexuality. For a lot of our donors, what's also happened many times is a donor will tell you, I can't support it through my organization because it's kind of controversial. I'll give you personal money. It's happened time and again for us. So there are people out there who want to support that, but not necessarily get their name or the organization's name involved. That becomes a kind of challenge. So that's it. Super sorry. Yeah, we just completed 25 years of grant making this year. Thanks, Rashmi.
Thank you so much. I know I had questions for you. Thanks. We'll hold on till the end because I think it'll be good to get a sense of each of their work. The next, of course, I think most of our speakers have already spoken so much, and I'm sure you've spoken to them very, very quickly. I'm going to introduce Deepika Sorabjee. She's been working with the Tata Trusts, as you know, for the longest time. 5 years. Sorry, it's the end of the day down. But I'm just going to keep it short and hand it over to you. I think one of the reasons why we were very keen on having the Tata Trust perspective is Tata Trusts themselves have been such an incredible space for creating the dreams that we have in the arts. My personal story with that is I went to the J.N. Tata Trust for funding for my UK education, and for whatever reason, because they thought I'd come from an NCPA background, they connected me to 3 other Tata Trusts. So about half of the funding that I raised came from this universe, and I felt like it's such an important structure that looks at supporting art practice in very interesting ways and the legacy that you've built over the years. So this is a model which is corpus driven, with a very, very professional structure, impact oriented, not just in terms of what you do, but as the group overall, the values that you have, and everybody's almost had an interaction with the output and the outcome of the work that the group has done. So this was something that, for me was great to put it as a structure to think about the future of arts in terms of money and funding, and what kind of worlds do we want to build when it comes to these. So over to you.
Yeah, I'll just start with a caveat that I think a lot of people in the art space know more about the Tata Trust than I do. I've only been here 5 years, but it's an ethos that matched mine when they asked me to come in and join, and I think that's what I'll talk about today. Why they support the arts, it's not an arts foundation, and the hows, how we do it. So this is a quote by the founder of the Tata Trust, G.N. Tata, and it's interesting because he says it's not only to work with the weakest in community, which all the other portfolios do, but to lift up the best and the most gifted. And I think in the arts, it's important. I think when you are talking, when you want to keep the integrity of an art form or an art practice or something to perpetuate it over time, you cannot you can't work with the lowest common denominator. And therefore, the vision of the arts and culture portfolio is to work with excellence, multiplicity, and the marginalized. And the marginalized, I don't mean just economic, which is what the others work with, but also gender, caste, region, many other things that come into the picture, even just an artist community. So it was started by the G.N. Tata Endowment. What Rashmi spoke about is an individual grant. That's how it started. And then over the years, the various members of the Tata family left their fortune to the trust. So it's, the Sir Ratan Tata Trust, the Sorabjee Tata Trust, JRD, Nawajbai, and these all together form the Tata Trust. Simultaneously, you can see the institutions on top that they started instituting. So and the only one in the arts is the NCPA, as you can see. And it was a simple statement when you go to the archives and read why it was. It said, you need an auditorium in South Bombay. So it's just as basic as that. At that time, that was what you needed. And that's how it's always worked, because it's always worked kind of not with any grand vision, but pressing needs. And that one small brick has, allowed for so much to happen. I'll just go back to that side. So this started with individual grants, moved to institution making around the 80s when needs became more granular and specific. They started working with specific NGOs who were working in the arts sector, to the last decade when they felt that working with these NGOs did not have the impact on community that they wanted. So they started, that's when I came in and they said, we're looking at community programs, design them, you can use multiple stakeholders, but you're more an enabler to address a gap in the sector rather than, working through smaller organizations who are having small impact. So these are the various portfolios. So you can see the arts and culture portfolio is just one of many. We account for about 1 to 2% of the budget, of the money that goes out every year, which is like government. So if I have to make a case for a program, I have to really fight hard as any of you all outside, which people don't realize. I was talking to the BMW Foundation director recently, and he supports the Kochi Biennale, and he was saying people just do not understand that when we work within organizations which work with other areas and other foundations, how hard we have to fight for our grants. These are the main verticals that we work in. These were identified by not just ad hoc, but by a team of consultants in 2010. Craft is missing here, so they identified conservation, craft, and performing arts are the 3 verticals. When I came in and they asked me, I said, can we do arts education as well? But in the tertiary level, because that's where critical standards are dropping. And we've done a fair amount of work in that through different models. So this is basically philanthropy and funding. When you talk about philanthropy, it's just general a desire to promote the welfare of others. It's similar to what Ratish was talking about in the morning when it says quality of life. It's a general thing that they give for good causes, for community, just to have that impact that either lift the quality of life or welfare. And funding is specific projects, which are time-bound, which are, then you all come into all the impact and what you're looking for when you talk to a grantee. So working within the mandate of the Tata Trust, which you've seen in the last few slides, it's shift from individual grants to institutions to non-profits to direct implementation, being enablers rather than just funders, and allowing for more trust-defined impact and layering between themes. This is another thing that we have to work with within the trust. So the program I described that we were doing, say in Dharavi with this Shankar Mahadevan Academy, rose out of not only them approaching us, but my migration colleague telling me that, if we want to do a music program in Bhubaneswar, how do we do it? So creating models of programs where we can learn from, establishing it, but it can also be taken to other sectors in the country. And then this is, we work through the small grants, which are program grants, which are directly for a program with a particular organization, or program grants aligned with the trust strategy. I can give you examples for all of these, but there's no time. And then direct implementation, which we use very minimally, because I think in the arts, you have to, you can't go in and say that I'm a musician and I'm going to do it myself. You actually go approach somebody, and the direct implementation will maybe just giving a project manager for that who can, manage the admin things. And these are some of the case studies that Rashmi asked me to provide you all. I think the reading material has gone out. And they're just 3 different examples that I can talk to about later in the question and answer time, that if you want to, where I can draw out how they're funding. Now, before I end, I just want to raise 3 points for later, is that indicators that people spoke about earlier. I think that's very important for fundraising. Very often you go to an organization where you're not speaking to an arts person. They understand numbers. You should be able to give the numbers. You can't shy away from it. We hosted an exhibition, the State of Housing exhibition, where the architects were talking how the architects have been written out of the picture of the current building that's happening in India. Why? Because in the 50s and 60s, when the big tenders for the dams and the buildings came up, they couldn't provide numbers, but the engineers could. And you see what's happening now is you just see the engineer, the contractor, and the government building, and the architect, and you see the dire consequences in urbanization now. Secondly, the fundraisers. I think this, more than art managers, is the dire need. I can't stress how much that we need to train people how to talk about the arts when they approach for it, how to tell, and telling stories is just not enough. That's a management tool. You have to be able to very quickly gauge in that meeting what is going to sell your project to that person. Whether it's numbers they want, whether it's one key thing that shift. And I think that we had a Brunswick Arts come from England down, and they asked me to send them across to some institutions. They came back and they said, so many of the major institutions just did not have fundraising units in them. And these are, and so they constantly, that it's somebody else taking on that responsibility when they could actually be doing some other, their own work rather than fundraising. And secondly, collaborations. I said more and more projects are getting bigger. I mean, the same grantees who are coming back to us who used to ask for 30 lakhs are suddenly asking for 6 crores, and we are not in a position to give that, So we are not saying diminish your project. We're saying that, okay, this is such a large project, we can give you so much, but you need to find somebody else who can match this. So that is something that I think these are the 3 main things when the money question comes. And I'm just going to end with a CSR report from this year. It's the CSR spending by companies listed on the NSE. This is Money Control that's put it out. Increased 18% to 11,961 crores. It's about 200 crores more than last year. But it's interesting to note this. Of the total funds spent on CSR, maximum spending was on education and vocational skills at over 4,440 crores. Among other areas, hunger, poverty, and healthcare witnessed spending of 3,242 crores, rural development, 1,322 crores, and environment sustainability, nearly 1,020 crores, the report found. Areas such as armed force veterans, technology incubators, slum development, and disaster management saw negligible spends. Nowhere is arts and culture mentioned. It's not even mentioned with the ones that didn't get. So it's this, this blank out. And so therefore for funding, the main things are this policy shift that has to happen, and and that's where fundraisers come in. You have to go and start changing this mindset. With CSR, it's not even government. And giving a state-wise overview, the report said that the top 10 states which received maximum CSR funds were Maharashtra, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Odisha, Delhi, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal, and Telangana. So the 10 top states accounted for 47% of the total CSR expenditure. Now, the one thing that I will say when, Parnimesh is not here, but in the house that we do, Parmesh, is nothing to do with South Bombay. Most of our programs are outside the metropolitan cities, not even in Bombay. Your loo here is more South Bombay. It took me 2 minutes to find the paper towels. so I think you're talking about a large country, a lot of programs suddenly in the arts has been, so you're going to need lots more money. It's not, we see the pressure because everyone keeps coming with much larger asks for funds and larger projects, and it's wonderful to listen to them. But then these are the practical things that one has to take cognizance of, that you have to change policy in government, and how you're going to do it. The government spends less than 1% on healthcare. If you think the government is going to spend on arts and culture, forget it. So it's that, and this year, Ratish is not in the room. Last year, CSR spending for built heritage dropped by 56%. And those are the, maybe because the government has realized that built heritage is an economic driver. So maybe they're putting in more money, but I don't know why.
And I'll pick up the data point in a second. Thank you so much for that. I didn't know quite a bit of this even after really going through the website. So thanks for that transition. With that, before we move into our questions, I want to obviously bring in Sanjoy Roy. Again, a completely different model. I'm just going to give out one figure here. Teamwork Arts, which Sanjoy is the managing director of, produces over 25 performing arts, visual arts, and literary festivals across 40 cities. That's like a massive number in terms of just cultural production, right, as projects. But also you've been associated with very many industry bodies. You're currently the co-chair of the Art and Culture Committee of FICCI and the president of EMA, Event and Entertainment Management Association. So what's interesting here, and one of the reasons why we wanted to sort of bring your perspective in, is how do you look at doing the work that you're doing with the organizational structure that you've chosen, which is a for-profit model, so which is in contrast to these two systems of creating financial support for the work that we are in here for.
Thanks so much, Rashmi, and thank you, Parmesh, for bringing us into this beautiful space. Truly, if it hadn't been for this, I wouldn't have come here. And thank you for signing. Thank you very much. Really, hats off and big. She signed through the day. We actually do about 33 annual festivals in 42 cities in 17 countries, and we're 31 years old, but our art space, we began working in the arts in 1996, and we created our first platforms in 2000 at the Edinburgh festivals, across the festivals, and thereafter, once we got the Safed Chap, we were welcomed into many other countries, starting with Singapore and then Australia, New Zealand. Much of the work that we do, really, the reason why we set up, or rather I set up as a company, was because I do feel very strongly that the arts needs to show and prove that it can create tangible wealth apart from what we know, the intangible wealth, and that we, like a bank or like a Godrej or like any other company, can give back to society, can contribute, can create jobs, give back to GDP, help with local economies. And unless people realize the value of that, and the pity is that we don't have enough research data on that, till they realize that, they will continue to look at us as marginalized, they'll continue to look at us as jolawalas, they'll continue to look at us as people who they have to give to, and they will continue to always cut in their budgetary things. The first thing that's always cut is arts funding. It's true not just in India. In Netherlands some years ago, when a new government came in, they cut the entire arts funding. In America, when President Trump took over, he wanted to cut the NEC, the National Endowment of the Arts, funding completely. So the senators at Raymond House got together. They got 4 or 5 of us. I get invited primarily because I've got long hair, which is white, so they think that I have something to say. And each of us got 10 minutes to convince the Senate as to why they should not cut arts funding. And the only thing that I said I need 5 minutes, pretty much like your timing. And I said, Senators, America has sold Coca-Cola and McDonald's at the back of American culture and its flag. If you cut arts funding completely and the support to the arts, the only culture that you'll be known for is gun culture. And they reinstituted the arts funding. They gave it $2 million more, so it went to 115 million, which is nothing. Teamwork, we primarily work in cities and countries where there's been conflict or where there's inequity. So everywhere from South Chicago to Australia, to Egypt, to Turkey, to Zimbabwe, places where people can't necessarily find their voice. We find ways to be able to tell people's stories. We try and build communities around the arts and therefore create wealth. We do this by raising money and resources, and I'll show you 4 slides at the end of this. None of this is easy. Everybody thinks that it's when they see me walk through the door, they think that that's the easiest thing, and everybody comes to us to raise money for them. It's damn hard because there isn't a policy. However, in recent times, with Harvard Endowment, with British Museum, V&A, and a whole host, and Stanford, and a whole host of international organizations, we came together with Monash in Australia, the university, and they did a research paper in terms of what is the science, if at all, of raising money. And the research paper has thrown up broadly that for every $1 million that you need to raise, you need 6 people, just in terms of staffing patterns. You need 2 people to look at individual donors. You need 2 people to look at corporates. You need 1 person who's a grant writer for grants, and you need 1 administration person to look after that body. That has in many ways proven true for us. In teamwork, all my colleagues, we're about 80 or 100 of us in India and across the world. Everybody has also a P&L, plus we have our marketing and sponsorship division, and Rajatri, one of our senior colleagues, is here. And that division works very closely with communication and all of the other festival producing divisions to be able to help raise money. One of our sort of bottom line for everything, and some of our festivals are free to the public because our principal philosophy continues to be that if you want to bring about social change, especially in places where there's inequity, then you have to do so through the access of knowledge and education. And therefore the Jaipur Literature Festival, like some of our other festivals, is free for people like that, because you and me and everybody in this room has access. Those people don't. For us, the success of the Jaipur Literature Festival is an example, because many of you may know that, was 4 years into the program when a man and his son came through the door. We had put in security for the first time. And I was standing there. I receive people for an hour every day. We get about 500,000 people through our doors. And because the guy was stopped and the son was stopped, I went up and I said, Bhaiya, can I help you? Is there a problem? And he said, I sleep on the pavement opposite SMS Hospital, and I know I'll never be able to send my son to school, nor will I ever be able to buy a book for him, but I thought if he heard a story, it would change his life forever. Now, those are intangibles that you can't ever really measure. How do you measure the youngest person who we released a book for this year was 8 years of age at the Jaipur Literature Festival, who'd been coming to the festival a number of times with his parents and was inspired to write a book. Last year it was 11 years, and the oldest was 92, who wrote a ballad about her marital rape at 92 and released it. How do you value that? So in the matrix that I'm going to show you, you don't see that value. Or in Toronto, GLF Toronto, that we opened for the first time this year. At the end of Izzeldin Abulesh's session, Izzeldin Abulesh is a doctor from Palestine. He was walking out of his house with his 3 daughters and his wife, and a missile came from Israel, killed 2 of the daughters, maimed 1, and killed the wife. And he talks about forgiveness, and wherever we've taken him, audiences have wept and given him a standing ovation. So now in Toronto, last year in October, he gets a standing ovation, people are crying, blah, 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 question and answer. The lady in the audience and stands up and said, 6 months ago, your country allowed me to come in here as a refugee. I came from Syria. I saved my son and me. The rest of my family was killed. We came here. 2 months ago, in a tram in Toronto, the Toronto police shot my son. Did I come to your country, having saved my son and my life, to have him shot by your police? Obviously, the audience, it fell apart, the session fell apart because it became really traumatic for everybody, because now it wasn't about them, it was about the now. And those are intangibles that you can't really measure and you can't find a money number to it. In Doha, we were told by the Doha Library that we can't do 3 things. We can't talk about the environment because they look at energy. We can't have Sufi music because it's haram. And we can't talk about LGBTQ. So what we did is we said, cool, that sounds interesting. And I was very keen to do something in the Middle East, primarily Doha, because of the library that they had created, which was fantastic. So we started with a keynote on environment, just that we didn't call it environment. We had Sufi music at night, and when they came hysterical, and they said, what's happening? The Rajatri was there, and I said, I don't understand the language, I can hear Allah, and is that haram? I didn't realize that, I'm so sorry. And that he said, no. And we had many people from the LGBTQ communities, not necessarily talking about LGBTQ, but really talking about many other issues, but they're being in the room. And at the end, when I asked Sheikha Hind, was this threatening? And she said, no. Our responsibility in the arts also is to present work in a way that makes it accessible, creates a window. And our responsibility today, in India especially, is to be able to push back against hatred, and there's no price to that. I'm just going to give you 4 quick slides because I know everybody wants to see financials, so what do I do? So this gives you a sense of, I've given you some percentage points, how our international festivals are compared to our literature silo, which is the Jaipur Literature Festival, plus its 8 iterations across the world, plus our other silos. This gives you our sponsorship revenue model. So we primarily do cash and barter, and then we do non-sponsorship is what we're trying to grow, which is merchandising, stall rentals, ticketing, delegate fees, food, creating craft-based stuff, etc. This is percentage. All of this is in percentage forms. So that rupees million is? Oh, forget that. It doesn't give you. I took the number out because it didn't make sense to put numbers. It's just that, And this is roughly what we do. So we co-own some stuff. We are commissioned to do stuff, but we do very little of that, and we own most of our festivals. As you can see, the gross margins keep varying. We're in a difficult space. We don't take money from governments necessarily because governments look at us as not being part of the narrative. Our problems today is that we're being seen as being counter to the narrative prevalent in the country and in many parts of the country. So we get pushed back, and a lot of people get frightened about giving us money. we were seriously looking at shutting down some of our activities this last year, including the Jaipur Literature Festival, because it was becoming really difficult to be able to manage, because every person who comes through our door may be free, but costs us money.
One thing is the ethic, the color of money. The other is the instrumentalization of the work that we do, and how are we preventing ourselves from being co-opted and our work being co-opted to other means, even if it means taking money. And I don't know whether, again, we can unpack that in its entirety, but that to me seems to be a question that we're constantly grappling with, the cultural capital and the co-option of the cultural capital. You, and then I'm going to hand it over to them.
Yeah, just a quick one. You know, like Sanjoy said, it's very difficult at one level to understand color of money, because all of us save, right? Where do you put? Do you put it in mutual fund? If your money is in the market, in some way, it is colored. That's one thing to say. On the other hand, I also feel, as IFA, we have to be very sensitive to the politics of the work that we support. And there, the question is different. There, the question is, what is the community that we serve, which is the community of arts and artists? What do they have to say or feel about certain kinds of money? But end of the day, I think it is for every institution to figure where they will draw that line. And having drawn it, you have to live with the consequences. So for example, like I have been talking on Facebook about Jaipur Lit Fest, handing over protesters of anti-CAA to the cops, and they had to spend. So I have been talking about it, but I'm sure you know it, that there will be people who will be critiquing that. You have to live with that critique. And as I was sharing with Deepika this morning, I have been called a Tata assisted killer or something like that, because IFA takes Tata money. And there are these lovely memes on us and the people we support. I was sharing it with Deepika this morning. No, but anyway, Tata money, where does it come from, etc. Is it colored, is it not? Now, that's something IFA and my team has to live with. So you draw your line and you have to live with the consequences. But you cannot say, I'm going to draw that line or not draw that line and then not live with the consequences.
Just to add, I mean, perception today is 90% of the battle. And once the perception goes out, for example, the perception that we are not with the government's narrative, it doesn't matter what you do, or for the perception that we actually handed them over to the cops. So nobody will ever check what happened or the incident, because the perception has gone out. And once that perception has gone out, do what you will, there is nothing that you can do, especially in social media today, where 1 minute is the time. The next minute that's over, it's the next point. So, but that perception sticks.
I think the first comment is here.
My name is Revanta. I'm a performing artist myself. I'm 35 and I've been doing it professionally since I was about 16. So I've already spent a good 20 years of my life as a working performing artist who has only ever earned his bread through dance or theater, Bharatanatyam or contemporary dance. I also happen to come from a family of artists, and I've seen a 70-year-old institution, which my family started, go through its days of flourishing and its days of tremendous, tremendous struggle. And part of that has to do with the fact that a lot of the work that came out of this institution was political, was addressing social issues that were often against the sort of mainstream narrative of the government. And I have, both in my individual capacity as an independent performer and as somebody who's seen the way this institution has developed over 70 years, felt a constant struggle looking for, asking for, sometimes begging for money to do the work that we do professionally. And this seems like the perfect panel to talk about whether there is the possibility of developing a sustainable business model for the arts that is perhaps not so dependent on asking for grants, or whether it's from NGOs or institutions, trusts, because the finances don't necessarily work for the arts as it would in any other business, right? If I create a show for a theater which is about of a capacity of, let's say, 350 or 400 seats, bums on seats, even if I sell out, don't necessarily cover the cost of what that production, and to be able to pay everybody who's involved in it and the creation of it and so on. So is there really the possibility of a sustainable business model that can be created for the performing arts that doesn't work in the way, masses, like a film would earn with box office?
Hi, I'm Trishla. We run a space called Tifa Working Studios in Pune. My question was very similar, so I thought that we could ask it together. So self-funding and sustainability, being a physical space also and being a very young organization, I think some of the struggles that come with the legalities of being set up as a Section 8 company where you can take in certain kinds of money and cannot take in certain kinds of money, where today most of our money comes from ticketing, whereas through the legal structure we're not allowed to show ticket sales over a certain amount. So how do we show it as either donor pass but still get kind of pulled up within the roster of not being able to accept that money? And then in Sanjay's statistics, it kind of showed options of merchandise, options of booths. Yet at this point in our young foundation, it's also some things I feel like within the community are things that are looked down upon, looked at in a way of like selling your soul for the arts. So it's kind of conflicting. So I'm just curious to know what are other models. I know unlike Europe, Japanese foundations have a tripart model where they'll take public money, private money, and also money from crowdfunding, essentially, whether that's through tickets or even venue hires of a certain kind. So just wanted to kind of hear a little bit more about if you have ideas on how more of that structuring can work.
Right. And I wanted to say this earlier today at some point. When you choose the arts, you're choosing a lifestyle. You're making a lifestyle choice. So if you want to have a car and a yacht and a whatever, become a banker. I think that needs to be very clearly stated. I know it's insecure and it's a word that went around the room. Yes, boss, it is. And the best art comes from the insecurity that the arts produces. So, let's get that big thing out there straight. Yes, there are models. Are they sustainable models? Yet to see. Today, teamwork has been invested into, and we hope, there's no clarity right now whether the jury is out and how it'll play out, but our hope is that, like the many literature festivals we've been able to inspire, if we are able to show that we're successful, many other organizations will take to this model. The not-for-profit model in India, I feel, is problematic. In America, not-for-profit has a completely different sense, and it works there, it works for them. It doesn't work here because trusts and societies that cultural organizations tend to cover themselves into brings to the fore a sense of, and forgive me for using this word, a sense of laziness. You have to work for your money. There's no other way. And like those people who sell a garment, sell a shoe, whatever, show them ethical and moral issues, you have to work 24/7 to sell your product. So what happens to experimentation? I think that's the big question. For that, you have the IFAs of the world and the Tata Trusts of the world to be able to further that. But to go to them because they're the easiest people to go to, no. If you feel you're creating something for the larger audience, the market forces does come into place. Not everything that we do gets 500,000 people, but you have to make that effort to get 500,000 people into the room.
Can you also shed light on any kind of dual models that you might have seen? Because that is possibly a structure.
There are numbers. So Brazil for me makes the most sense. And so in Brazil, every locality, so Vikroli would have, every trader in Vikroli would give a tax That tax is used for the sports complexes, a dance, theater, a gymnasium, library. The space that is created in the defense colony or the Vikhroli is completely subscription-based, full 24/7. All the theater and the not-for-profits and the amateur companies, etc., get a little space and a time in that calendar to work, and everybody contributes to that because they feel it's theirs. And that then leads to the big carnival and stuff. It is one of the best models that I've seen. The French model, I don't think works at all for here, and neither does the British model.